Good evening, everybody. Today, the topic is dance on stone. When we say dance on stone, it exactly means that how the dancing figures that we see in the images, especially made of stones, we start thinking about those dancing figure when we find them in the performing art when they are performed by the performers. So in that context, we will be discussing how relevant it is to discuss about the visual art such as stone made sculptures right from the beginning of the centuries when people started making images, and most of the temple images that we see in various parts of our country, and that gives an idea that how dance as well as the performing art like other instrumental music and vocal music, singing, how they are connected with the temple. As much on the facade of the temples, we find the images of nymphs, apsaras, gandharvas, and various other celestial musicians, and how they are connected with one another. So, this is one thing which we will have to discuss when we talk about the origin of dance and the origin of plastic art in India. For example, the text Vishnu Dharmottar Puran is a very interesting text with regard to the iconography of the plastic images. And when this plastic image making story started, or the the idea of making images, of various images started, there are certain guidelines or prescriptions which were prescribed in the Vishnu Dharmottar Puran. This is a very interesting text which gives you in detail about the aesthetic part of the visual art, especially the paintings and the plastic art, and how these painting and the sculptural art have influenced the performing art, especially dance. That we are going to discuss, and how it is relevant to discuss the visual art in the context of performing art, or in the context of the art of dancing. As we know that both the performing art like dance and the visual art are connected with the temple, and when they are connected with the temple, obviously it is connected with our religious stories, our mythological stories, and how temple played a very significant role in our society, especially the ancient society, where it is just the abode of not only the gods and goddesses, not only the celestial environment, but also a place where important decisions were made by the important category or section of people who used to rule in those days. And that is why temple plays a very significant role. This is one thing. Now coming to the uh, say discuss about the temple. What a temple means to us. What do you mean by a temple? Generally, people think that temple is the place where the deity is worshipped. This is a common notion. But philosophically, temple is not a place of worship merely. Rather, it is the body or the human or the Purusha himself, and the temple surrounding where all those beautiful things are sculptured, or these sculptures which are embedded on the facade or engraved on the stones are nothing but the four aspect of life, that is dharma, artha, kama and moksha. And these four things constitute purushartha, and it is only after attaining the dharma, artha, kama, you achieve the moksha. And that is why the temple interior is not decorated as much the exterior is decorated as we find in our body. Our body is very beautiful looking, but if you go into the body, you don't find those beautiful things. And this is what the body is all about. And in the canons of temple architecture, the anatomy, the body anatomy, are the similar body anatomies are represented in the temple architecture, like the griva or the neck, the mastaka, the body, the janga or the thigh, and the pada or the feet. So here the body is very important, and it is body which, I mean, epitomizes the entire cosmos, the entire Brahma or the supreme consciousness is within this body. And that is why when you enter into the Garbhagriha, you find the consciousness, and which generally temple insides are dark. And this is what the temple is all about. Now you have in the temple, there are chambers which are dedicated to the performing art which are carved on the stone. And that is why these are all integrated. They cannot be separated, and they cannot be studied in isolations. So both in the performing art as well as in the visual art, one thing is common, and that is the attainment of the supreme consciousness. What for the dance is all about, what for the temple is all about, what for all these things. And here lies the basic concept of Indian philosophy and Indian way of life. And that is why, unlike other countries where the dance is just for amusement or for acrobatics or for, I mean, entertainment, here it is meant for the attainment of the spiritual knowledges. And to attain that, one has to perform all these exercises or all these practices, and then only you achieve or attain the supreme consciousness. So here a dancer's role is not just to dance for herself or to the audience. It is the dance that is for the almighty, for the supreme consciousness, or for the attainment of the spiritual knowledge. In Sanskrit language, dancing or dance is called nritya. And in the classical dancing tradition, Indian classical tradition, nritya and nritya are the two important thing one has to examine. And it is clearly distinguished, the classical tradition clearly distinguishes between nrita and nritya. Nritya is based on bhava or expression, which is the most important aspect of dancing. Nritya is based on bhava, whereas nrita is based on the movement of body, the movement of hands, the movement of feet, all these attributes which are synchronized with music, and then only the performance is done. So, in a holistic way, when you see a dancing posture, it constitutes of certain things. One of them is the movement of body, body postures, gestures, feet movement, hands movement. These are the part of the nrata. And the other one is the most essential thing is nritya, which is purely based on expression. So when you have a combination of these two, that Nrata and Nritya, then you get a complete picture of dance. So therefore, when you talk about the expression or the bhava, which is taken from the poetry. So here lies a very important point which needs to be addressed while talking about the aesthetics part of dancing or the aesthetic part of the performance, which is connected with our Indian literature, especially the poetry. And it is the poetry that decides how the performance, especially the expression, are to be created. The expressions are to be created in such a manner that it should reach to the audience and influence the audience, educate the audience about the objective of the performance, through which a particular thought or expression or a particular concept or subject or a narrative is produced through various emotions. And the emotions are not of singular in nature, they are various emotions, and these emotions which we'll be discussing in the while we are discussing about the aesthetic part of the performance of dancing, as much we discuss in the visual art, because it is only the Vishnu Dharmottara Puran which clearly defines the various bhavas and expressions, and the aesthetic, Indian aesthetic constitutes of 6 limbs or Shadanga, which is very, very important and which is used both in the field of painting as well as in the visual art. Now, when these things are produced and shown to the disciples or the students, whether in the form of acting or in the form of visual art, the disciple learns the various movement of the feet as well as the various movements of or gestures which are found in the performance, and each of the gestures denotes certain things. Similarly, he or she has to perform, while performing the dance, has to have the emotions which are varied in natures, depending on the theme of the literature or depending theme of the subject, or subject is very important here, and especially the poetry is so penetrating that it influences the audience, and also it gives a lot of satisfaction to the dancer that he or she is capable of reproducing those emotions before the audience. And internally she also realizes that while performing a dance before the supreme consciousness or the deity, it is almost the dedicated devotion that she or he has towards the divinity, and that can only be realized when you do all these things while performing and performing your dance. You understand the meaning of all those expressions so that you can act accordingly. Now let us talk about the aesthetic part of the dancing. How in a dance or how in a dance performance the aesthetic is important. And while discussing about aesthetic in performing art like dancing, one has to understand the Indian aesthetics which is there in our poetry. Depending on the poetry, it all depends on the strength of the poetry, or in the poetry, the expression of the author is presented in such a manner that ultimately determine the strength of not only the poetry but also the performing artist who is performing a play based on that poetry. And in the poetry, the essential element when we discuss lies in the flavor or rasa. Rasa is nothing the beauty or the aesthetic part of it. And it is after all nothing but the emotion which are to be executed by a performer or by a sculptor when he is executing an image. So having rasa is a rasamanta, and when it is applied to a performing art, the rasika or the connoisseurs gets an immense pleasure, an immense joy, and reaches up to the ecstasy after seeing a performance or seeing a beautiful image which is filled with rasa. So it all depends on the beholders or the rasikas or the connoisseur's mind, how he has or she has perceived it, and how the poetry has touched to the individual. So, in the aesthetic of emotion, Rashika is a very important character, and the second important is effective use of those sentiments or emotions or expressions, and eventually it causes the determinants of the entire presentations. So there are the determinants are called vibhava, and the consequents are called anubhava. And the third thing which is very important, which is connected with these two, which bridges the gap between these two, is the bhava or the expression. See, when you see the determinants, it decides how deliberately the manifestation of feeling is executed, or the movement of gestures of various part of the body, like the feet, the hands, or the gestures which are indicating various ideas, or indicating various attributes of the uh, individual or the personality or the narrator who is narrating the entire thing. And these are purely based on moods, and these moods are 33 in number. And there are 33 moods. One has to understand there are 33 moods. And the rasas, of course, the Navarasa, like the heroic, or the Veera rasa, Karuna rasa, like all Vivatsha rasa and Hasya rasa. So you have got the Navarasas, which I'm not elaborating here. And these, basically we know about the Navarasas, whereas these moods constitutes of various in number. We are numbering about 33. And there is something called involuntary emotions, and this involuntary volition, involuntary bhava or expression or emotion is called sattva bhava. Sattva bhava. And what are those sattva bhavas? They are 8 in numbers. The rasas are 9 in number, and beyond 9 there are 33 moods, and there are 8 involuntary emotions. And together, when they are taken into consideration, or when they are applied in the execution, through execution of a performer, you get the complete picture, and you get the ultimate uh, production of the performance. So in order to evoke, the rasas are essential, which are 9 in number, and the moods are equally important, and these involuntary emotions are also very important. Now there are various aesthetic elements, as I told you that 6 limbs of Indian aesthetics has been divided into 6 different limbs or Shadanga, which is a very important element which needs to be expressed or produced while executing a performance. Then only a successful accomplishment of a dance is possible. Unless the aesthetic element is not uh, realized by a performer, the dance remains incomplete. While talking about the aesthetics part of the performance, or in the visual art, when you are talking about the power or expression which are incorporated in the visual art, as much it is incorporated in the performing art. The basic 6 limbs, what we call the sadanga, of Indian aesthetics is very, very important, and that is why the relevance of stone art or the visual art produced on various icons are important, because as you see these images you find how the bhava has been transformed into various actions executed in the plastic art. And the same thing can be applied while executing them in the performing art. In the Sadhanga, the six limbs, when we talk about it, is Vasyayana's Kama Sutra, where the six limbs are described as the two arms, the two legs, and the two, one is the torso and the other one is the head. And Vachayan also talks about the rasas and the application of the rasas or the navarasas, which he wanted to elaborate while talking about execution of paintings. And the sculptor has to know the line drawing or the rekha, where the contours, the lines, the figures, the subtlety of the image, the according to the expression, how the body are to be um, figured or designed. Same thing is also applicable with the performer, because the performer is capable of producing all those things because of the flexibility of the entire body that we have. Our body is very, very flexible, and as per the scriptures, Vishnu Dharma Puran, when we apply those shadangas are the six limbs, as I told, the two legs, two hands, the torso, and the head. And in another language, if you describe the Indian aesthetics while examining all these things, you are talking about the expressions and the moods, the beauty, the sublimity, and the distinguishing factors, cuteness, the silliness, or the pretensions, all these things, how they are to be stimulated while expressing a particular theme or thought or play or drama, whatever you are performing. And this is why it is called Rupa Bheda Pramanani Bhava Lavanya Yojanam Sadrishyam Varnika Bhangam Iti Chitram Sadakam. This is what applied to the paintings, and later on it is incorporated in the plastic art of stone images. So when you see all these paintings, you can develop an idea that how a particular lady or a male figure, by virtue of various movement, body movement, expression, as prescribed in the Shadanga, that is Rupa, Veda, Varnika, and then the Sadrisha, or how look-alike things. All these things are important while talking about the expression, the body movement and the expression. These two are very, very important aspects while you are talking about the aesthetics of a performer, the aesthetic role to be played by a performer. The performer has to meticulously uh, study all these things and again and again should see those images which can give you an idea how you can replicate them through the flexibility of the body that you have and the mind that you have, which can produce the various emotions and moods. And that is why amongst the six limbs like Rupa, Bheda, Pramanika, and others, the most important thing which needs to be addressed here in performing art, which I personally feel, is the bhava part or the expression part. For example, the Shakuntala's Kavya, Kalidas's Kavya's character Shakuntala, and there is a beautiful narratives that we have, that how Dushyanta, seeing the beauty of Shakuntala, and here lies the most important role played by the poet. The poetry part is very important, very, very penetrating, because Shakuntala's beauty is the ultimate beauty which can be comprehended by any scholar or any poet or any person who can imagine about what beauty is all about. Similarly, the other character in the Siva Parvati, how Parvati has been presented, uh, that is also a very important lesson to learn while the performer is performing a particular dance episode. So here the beauty has to be produced not only through emotions and the body gestures and colors, etc. You have to create an ambience while doing a performance, and the ambience needs to be created because in the poetry there are various descriptions. As I was telling you, the Dushyanta looking at the beauty of Shakuntala, just imagining about Lord Brahma, that how Brahma might have thought about conceiving a beautiful woman like that of Shakuntala. So just imagine, you'll have to see all these aspects of aesthetics, and this is what aesthetics is all about. Aesthetics is not which can be explained or narrated or presented before you, that this is what the parameter to describe what beauty is all about. It has to be perceived over a period of time through various images, seeing those images and reading those poetries and reproducing them while you are performing a particular play. Similarly, on the other expression part, there are in the poetry various other things are told. Say, for example, the Abhigyana Sakuntalam, or take any of the plays when where you find various description about the nature, and the nature has been portrayed beautifully in the poetry, and while you're performing, the ambience has to be created. And the most important aspect, which has been elaborately discussed in the Vishnu Dharmottara Purana, which is again I'm insisting all the performer to read and try to understand before going for any of the performance, how the ambience is created by virtue of creating trees, paintings of trees, droplets of water from the tree leaves. All these things are creating an environment which substantiate or justifies the entire ambience. And it is again the connoisseurs, when he sees or she sees the performance, finds as if is very much absorbed and exalted as well. Similarly, the color is a very important aspect which Bharat Muni is again describing in the Natya Shastra, how different mixing of colors, how each of the colors are to be given to the body and to the characters. So each of the character has got a separate color. Individual or character are to be given not only a different costumes but also color. Similarly, in the performance, you have to see the different kinds of coiffures or the hairstyles, like the Rijvikas, the kinds of veni or headdress that you have. They are very elaborately. There are 13 types of coiffures or headdresses which are discussed. And those body movement, body gestures like the Tribhanga Mudra or the Samapada, all these uh, things are to be very meticulously followed because they are so much inextricably interwoven. The poetry, the aesthetics, the music, the play, and the performance. So none of these things can be isolated from one another because they cannot be studied in isolation because they are very much in consonance with one with other. And that is why you find a picturesque scene when a performance is performed before the audience. Now, the costumes part, when you study in the Vishnu Dharmottara Puran, each of the divinities, for example, the Pitambara means you need to have a Pitavarna robe or a yellow color drapery or garment. So um, uh, the attributes which are iconographically defined with a particular character, like Banamala with Vishnu, Pitambara with Vishnu, or Pitambara with Krishna. So you have to have all these things which needs to be incorporated in the performing art as much you find them in the visual. And so unless you see the images, the paintings as well as the stone images, you cannot understand, because every time a guru will not be there to advise you, and there are many learners who are not able to get a guru. But if they visit to the temples, if they visit to various places where all these things are depicted, especially the museum where you have a galaxy of images on aesthetics, where you can study aesthetics from the stone and painting images, and you apply them while performing a particular performance.